Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Learning Technologies. I'm Heather Ross, and I'm joining you from the University of Saskatchewan. My guest today is Katia Hildebrandt, who is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Education at the University of Regina, where she works with pre-service teachers and teaches classes in pedagogy, curriculum, and educational technology. She's also a former K-12 teacher, with previous teaching experience in middle and high schools, and has worked with various school districts and institutions to develop guidelines for technology integration in classrooms, and has facilitated several student events on the topics of digital citizenship, which is what we're talking about today. Before we get started, though, I want to remind people that if you are watching and you have questions, and you're watching this on our Google Hangouts page as opposed to in the course or on YouTube, you might see a button for asking a question in the Q&A area. Otherwise, the best place to send me questions, because both Katia and I are watching, is on Twitter with the hashtag ILT_USASK, so ILT_USask. And we do have some questions that came in on the discussion forums in the course, but otherwise, if you want to send any in on Twitter, we will welcome them. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us, Katia.
Hi, Heather. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, you taught a course with an open course with Alec Kuros on this topic a while back, and that's where we got the idea of, oh, she'd be really good for this. So let's bring her in. So I've just got a few questions that came in already. But if you want to start off with, if there's anything you want to say to start off, or we can just go into the questions, just let me know.
I think that starting with questions makes sense, so
okay.
Go from there.
All right. Okay, well, this one came in from Linda, and her question was, and you said you've been into the course, so you know about the article from the New York Times. The article about teenagers sharing passwords is a couple of years old. Do you know if there's been any research since which looks at the impact of schools encouraging kids to be more tech savvy? 2 years on, are they more or less likely to be sharing?
So actually, I saw that article in the course, and so I was looking last night to see, what had kind of come up around that recently, and I found an article about kind of generally people sharing passwords online, and it's not just the young people who are doing it. It turns out, in fact, it's a lot of the older population that's doing it as well. I mean, they're talking 67% of people share at least some passwords with a significant other, and that rate actually increases as you go into older demographics. So that's kind of an interesting kind of twist on things, because I think we usually assume that it's the young people who are maybe more unsafe with things. But in terms of like schools supporting this kind of stuff, I think we're still seeing that it's really the implementation of digital citizenship curriculum has been very slow, and a lot of that comes from the fact that there's this misconception that students, because they're using technology all the time, are really quite savvy about it and already know kind of what they're doing, so we don't need to bother with that, right? But there is quite a bit of research that's come out recently. There was a Media Smarts report that came out, I believe, last year that kind of makes it pretty clear that kids are not any more savvy than adults are in terms of what they should be putting online. And so it is something that we need to push more. And I believe it's coming through the ministry in the next couple of years. But at this point, schools aren't doing it. A lot of schools are barely using technology in the classroom. So,
right. And then you were talking about how we assume that students know how to use this, so we don't worry about teaching them digital citizenship. And I think the other end is when we just say you can't use it.
Right.
We ban technology from our classrooms, and we forget that, well, when they walk out of the classroom, we still have a responsibility about educating them on these topics outside.
Well, and not to mention that you can block things on your school servers, but so many of those students are coming in with a cell phone that has, like they've got their own internet connection. So you can't use filters anymore and assume that's going to fix the problem. We need to teach them how to be responsible online.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. We had another question from Sherry. Mm-hmm. And she said, Katia, I find it incredibly scary that teens pressure each other for passwords. But when I think back to my youth, I remember we were also pushy about testing the boundaries of our relationships. I imagine the excuse regarding parents having a cow is respected, since it is one step away and less personal than just saying, no, I don't want to share. Do you know of, or can you suggest any other good excuses or ways to avoid giving into this kind of peer pressure? Peer pressure is very hard for young people to resist. So what advice would you give to, I guess, one, teens, but also, as you pointed out in that Time article you shared earlier on Twitter, adults doing it? So a boyfriend or girlfriend pressuring the person they're dating, or even a spouse. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well, and I think that again, it comes back to educating students in the classroom, making sure that these are discussions that we're having early. Like, you can start in kindergarten talking about, okay, you're going to have an account on Club Penguin or something, right? Something for young kids. Well, how do you choose a safe password, and how do you protect that password? And so if it becomes something that they're doing from a very early age, and an understanding that they have from really early on that, like, this is something personal, we don't share it, then I think that becomes more of the norm. That being said, I mean, if you're looking for kind of excuses to use, there are also, I know there are password kind of systems that you can use. So for instance, there's LastPass, which actually stores all your passwords for you. So, I suppose you could say, I don't even know my password. It's stored on this system, and I actually don't have access to it. It's a random generated series of numbers and letters. But I think it's got to be less about the excuses and more about kind of the systematic education from a really early age, and giving those really kind of powerful examples, not to scare students, but say, like this is the stuff that could happen if you're putting your passwords out there. So, let's look at a few stories of situations that have happened because of that. And that, I think, is helpful for older generations as well, because there's just often not that knowledge of the potential consequences.
Right. This one, actually, it was one I wanted to ask you. So there's a lot of debate, and it's been a long-standing debate about sites allowing people to be anonymous in the comments. And that's the comment section. I mean, frequently people say, don't read the comments, just don't go there. But what's the best way to deal with that? Should we not be allowing for anonymous? What is the best way to deal with that issue?
I mean, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, but I mean, there are certainly some benefits to anonymity in terms of, allowing people to perhaps be part of communities that they otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable joining. So, allowing even young people who are questioning their gender identity, they're able to go online and to have these conversations with people who are in similar situations without outing themselves. And so kind of the history around anonymity online, there are a lot of positives that we can take from that. But in terms of kind of the trolls in those spaces, I think, again, it's about kind of educating students and educating ourselves about what to do in those situations. Like, I think that's part of it. What do you do when you see an inappropriate comment? How do you report things on a site if they're not, if they're really inappropriate, if they're potentially offensive? So having those discussions is important. But I think it's also, we have to remember digital citizenship isn't really any different from citizenship at this point. Our online lives are so similar to our or so entrenched kind of in our offline lives that that we can't think of this offline spaces or online space as something totally different. So we need to think, well, if this were happening in a face-to-face situation, how would we be dealing with this? Is the comment just something that's kind of annoying or rude, or are we talking about things that are actually really problematic, hurtful, potentially threatening? And in that case, that's a totally different scenario in terms of, okay, are we reporting? Are we looking for an IP address if there's something serious going on here? Are we blocking them from whatever community this is? And so I think we have to recognize that we need to kind of figure out what the rules are on those online spaces and see how they are very much connected to the rules that we have offline in terms of citizenship.
Right. Right. We have a question that came in on Twitter earlier.
All right.
From Jeffrey, and he wanted to know, how do we address the digital citizenship of those who hide behind freedom of expression to be rude, offensive, or worse? So this is people who they're not being anonymous.
Right.
And it's just, well, this is free speech. I can say whatever I want.
Well, and I think, again, I mean, online isn't any different from offline. And so there are certainly instances of people who've said really dumb things online who have then, gotten in a lot of trouble about it. I mean, people who have kind of made jokes about bombing airplanes or that kind of stuff, and they end up, like, those allegations are taken quite seriously, and they go after these people. But recently, I don't know if you've come across this, but there's a Tumblr site called Racists Getting Fired. And so it's actually a site for people to post things that they find on Twitter, on other online kind of forums that are, really offensive or racist. People talking about how they're going to go down to Ferguson and they're bringing their guns because they're going to, shoot some people, and like really, really offensive stuff. And what these people do on this forum, it's almost like cyber vigilantism, where they actually go and they'll track down where these people work. They report them to their bosses, and they end up getting these people fired because of their online comments. And that's a pretty extreme example, right? Like, you're talking about really nasty things that people are saying online. But I think we need to readjust our thinking sometimes about these online spaces, and we need to recognize that people will make mistakes online, and unfortunately we're not in the place where we can just forget about them. Like, they don't disappear like they once did. And so we do need to, as a society, start thinking about what does it mean to, like, what can we forgive online, and what does deserve kind of the cyber vigilantism, and what kinds of things can we just say, okay, that's a kid being a kid, let's let it go. There's the girl just recently a few months ago, I guess, who posted the selfie in Auschwitz. And so she took a picture of herself outside of, like, in the concentration camp, smiling. And she posted it on Twitter, and got, like, just a ton of backlash, people who were telling her that she was a terrible person. And then she came back and she said, well, actually, my dad and I had always studied, like, we were studying Auschwitz together and we were planning to visit it, but then he ended up dying. And so, I'm smiling there because it's the fulfillment of this promise that I had made to my dad. And so she kind of came back with this other side of the story. So I think it's important to remember that sometimes things online come without any context at all.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that we're not judging too quickly, because judgment can really spiral out of control. And then, there's also the obvious answer of, you don't feed the trolls, right? You don't engage with people who are being kind of rude and obnoxious for no reason. So
yeah.
A variety of things. I think it really depends on what the comment is and the context of it.
Yeah. There was an incident, I guess it would be about 2+ years ago now, during the U.S. presidential debates, that somebody who was tweeting for KitchenAid, the appliance and small gadgets company, an employee of one of their marketing wings, was tweeting during the debate and said something really offensive about President Obama, but made the mistake of accidentally tweeting it from the KitchenAid account instead of from her personal account.
Right.
And boom, there was somebody who was a supervisor to her who was suddenly on that Twitter account saying, this person will never be tweeting for us again, and we take full responsibility. And but it's things like that happen that may be unintentional. Anyway, it was a stupid comment to make from your personal account too, but she had the right to make it from her personal account. But she pulled a major brand, into that as well. So I've talked to a few people when I talk about the importance of digital citizenship, and they talk about, well, we need to keep students offline. We need to keep them from posting anything because they're young and their ideas haven't developed, and it's really not fair to them that we put anything online yet. And I always put it as they're already online,
Right.
whether they want to be or not. Their friends may have posted pictures from a party or something. And I think that when we get them to be online related to education, it's giving them a chance to put out a positive to counteract that. And I tend to think of this as we used to hear about you have to be careful in school, you have to do better in your grades and your behavior because of the permanent record.
Right.
And this is the new permanent record, and this is way more permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to make that argument about that we actually need to help them get a good image of themselves out there, because a bad image is going to be incredibly damaging to them, and no image at all is also damaging these days, because people wonder if you have zero online presence, what are you hiding?
Right. And I mean, it shows that you're not engaged in what has become a pretty big part of life, right? And like, you know, that's problematic as well. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work with pre-service teachers, and, you know, teachers as a profession are pretty heavily scrutinized in terms of kind of their personal lives and the things that they get up to on the weekends. And so I always, one of the things that they do for my pedagogy classes is they start building an e-portfolio. And the reasoning behind that is, well, you know, you may not have much of your own stuff online, but you have potentially friends who aren't pre-service teachers who don't realize that photos of you, you know, really drunk at the bar are not going to look good. So you want to make sure that the first thing that your students find, or that your students' parents find, is something that you're controlling.
Yep, absolutely. So you talked about how schools don't do enough on digital citizenship. So what, if you were going to create the curriculum on that, what things do they need to cover? What things should be, and we're talking about this at the university as well, because we really want to make sure that it starts, they haven't gotten it in the K to 12. We want to make sure they get it before they go out of here. Mm-hmm. So what do you think needs to be covered at the different levels? So like, where do we start in elementary? What do we do with them in high school? And what should we be doing with them in post-secondary?
So I think I know that one of the articles that you actually shared on Canvas was it was Mike Ribble's 9 Elements of Digital Citizenship.
Yeah.
And that, I know, so I was involved in drafting the digital citizenship policy guidelines for the Ministry of Education here. And we based that around those 9 elements, because I think that they provide kind of a good foundation for starting to think about all the different aspects that we do need to be talking about. But I mean, in terms of, you know, things that we can do early on, things as simple as we were saying earlier, you know, talking about creating passwords, talking about, you know, how do you keep that password safe now that you've made it? How do you go online and search for something on Google? Like, that's something that, you know, even my pre-service teachers coming in, you know, 19, 20-year-olds, a lot of them are not good at Googling, and they don't, you know, they don't know how to sift through the results, and they also really don't know how to tell, in many cases, what's legitimate and what's not. Right. And so that, like, the digital literacy aspect of it, I think, is a really important skill to start teaching early, because that's a way that you can keep yourself out of a lot of trouble, just knowing, you know, how to find a good piece of information. You know, what are you looking for? If you're trying to get something from a Wikipedia article, even to get a general sense of the topic before you start researching, what are you looking for to make sure that that's actually a legitimate Wikipedia article even? Right. And I mean, then also in elementary school, I think it's important that we're talking about kind of digital health and wellness in terms of, you know, balance in life, spending a lot of time online, you know, what's a healthy kind of screen time balance. You know, you see kids even with like repetitive strain injuries from typing, from clicking, and so I think talking about that early on is actually, it seems kind of silly, but it is something that we need to take into account. Mm-hmm. And just things about kind of online safety in general, in terms of talking to strangers online. I mean, kids are getting into chat rooms, they're joining Facebook really early, so talking about that kind of safety, I think, is really important at an early age. Mm-hmm. And then especially as they're going into middle years, thinking, okay, how, you know, who am I going to friend online? what kind of information is it safe for me to share online? Where can I share those things? How do I know if a site is kind of secure? And then going into high school, another thing that we need to worry about is kind of digital commerce, thinking about buying things online, because young people are buying huge amounts of stuff on sites like Amazon. So making sure that students are aware of kind of the dangers of that in terms of credit card theft, in terms of, just not getting the thing that they actually ordered because they didn't look at the company's reputation online. I mean, I think it's not being taught at home, and so it does fall on the schools to cover those things that maybe seem like they're outside of kind of the traditional school's purview, but they're not really. Right. And the problem is we're getting the university students who need all of that covered, because they haven't had it from an early age, so we have to kind of go back and deal with a lot of things from very early on. Simple things like how to set your Facebook profile settings.
Yeah.
Like I've had students who say, "Oh no, it's totally private. You can't see any of this." And then we go on and like, "Well, actually, I can see every profile picture and every picture you've ever posted." Yep. So can your students, so can their parents, and so can your potential boss. So, yeah. There's not a lot of literacy around that. So we have to kind of start from scratch too.
Yeah, I've seen Facebook profiles for young people that I know who I'm not friends with on Facebook.
Right.
But I can see their name, I can see their age, I can see what school they go to.
Yep.
And it's all absolutely out in the public.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine if you're going to put all those details on Facebook, but you need to know how to set your privacy settings so that only people that you really want to be able to see that can see that.
Right. And also talking to them about, okay, what are the consequences of putting your school name out there? Like, what could happen if people know, what school you go to? What are the potential risks of that? And I think it's important that we're not scaring kids, because they're not getting offline. So they're not going to listen if the message is, don't talk to anybody online ever. It's not a realistic message, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. So giving them kind of positive avenues for doing it. Okay, what are the safe sites? How do I interact safely with someone online? What do I do if I meet someone online and I want to meet them in person? How do I go about that in a way that's not really sketchy? I was talking to some pre-service teachers, and one of them she was saying that her neighbor has a 7-year-old son, and he plays Minecraft all the time. And the other night, apparently, the neighbor found him in the back alley doing some sort of Minecraft information exchange with somebody who he'd met on Minecraft. And this was a 7-year-old, and she had no idea that he was even playing with other people on Minecraft. So she didn't realize, like, parents need to also know, what these sites are and what kinds of things it's possible to do on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Secret Minecraft deals in the back of the room. Not something that you expect to have to deal with.
No. I have a 6-year-old, and she watches Netflix and plays games on the iPad, but they're not multiplayer games. There's no network connections or anything. But she already talks about friends at school that have cell phones.
Right.
And smartphones, and she wants her own iPad, and she won't share the she said, and when I get mine, I'm not sharing the password with you. And we said, okay, well, you can get one when you can buy it. Well, is it more than $100? Yes. And I made this promise that when you have your own and you've bought it, you can keep the password secret. And I can make that promise because I know that by the time she has the money to buy her own iPad, there'll be something else. It won't be an iPad, and I can say, no, that was for the iPad. This is a totally different device, and you're going to give us the password. Yeah. But, you'd think we'd learn the lessons by now that we're just telling our kids, no, don't do it, that, don't date that person. That doesn't work.
Right. So we need to say, like, well, what do you do when somebody sends you a nude photo online? What's your reaction? And I think from the parents' end, then the message has to also be, I'm not going to take away your device if you tell me that something bad happened, because that's just going to lead to kids not wanting to share anything about it. Mm-hmm. So, there needs to be kind of that understanding. Well, you can tell me what happens. I just want to make sure that I know, what's going on.
Yeah, we want to make sure that, excuse me, we want to make sure that they're still communicating with us, because there is so much going on, and if we are completely in the dark about what they're doing, then they're in back alleys exchanging information about Minecraft. Right. Yeah. Wow. Wow. We're still open for some questions on Twitter if anybody wants to send any in. I know that because we did this on Monday this week as opposed to Thursday or later in the week the way we did last week, a lot of people haven't had a chance to go through the materials yet this week. So I think that's one of the reasons why we didn't have a whole lot of questions come in yet. We may have some come in later, and maybe I can email them to you.
Of course.
So we talked about sort of elementary school age and high school and post-secondary students, but how do we go about, what's the best way we can go about educating parents?
I think that there are, again, it kind of falls on the schools to do it, and I think that it's really important that we're, holding kind of parent information nights. I've heard some schools actually host events where the students sign up to teach parents about particular apps or things like that, and that's kind of a neat way to approach it, and I think that sometimes we'll bring in more parents, because now it's like a school concert instead of a parent information night, except that it's a presentation. And so that's definitely part of it. And I mean, just having, anytime you've got the parents in there, having those conversations, even if, I think perhaps having a media policy in your own classroom so that you're sending home, a media release to the parents, maybe that there's some information in there about what they can do on their end at home.
Right.
So it's hard though, because the problem often is it's the parents of the students who, come from lower socioeconomic status backgrounds who aren't going to be able to come in, and those are often the students who are using the technology without much guidance at home anyway. And so that becomes problematic. So I think a lot of the education then has to come through the children, the kids need to be educated so that they can then share that with their parents. Mm-hmm. It's not like we can force them to come in, right? It's tricky. But I think the more that schools do to kind of open their doors to parents and say, we're having this event, we're bringing in this speaker to talk about digital citizenship, here are some of the reasons why it's important, and not relying on kind of fear tactics. Well, if you don't come, then your child's going to get kidnapped online. Like that's not going to be very helpful. But making it kind of an ongoing conversation in schools,
right,
really important.
Right. Well, we're at about the half-hour mark right now, and like I said, it's pretty quiet on Twitter right now, and I understand that might very well be because of when we're doing this. If anybody has any questions for us right now, the hashtag again is ILT_USask. We'll probably stick around for maybe a few more minutes because I was told last time that there was a little bit of a lag on the video, so somebody might see this in about 2 minutes and be frantically sending in a tweet.
Yeah, there definitely is a lag in terms of the kind of the Hangouts on air. I know because I actually had students last semester who did a presentation on it, and they actually ran the Hangout in the classroom, and it was pretty hilarious. But it did have a couple minutes of lag on it, so we experienced that hilarity firsthand.
Technology's great, isn't it?
Yes, when it works, it is great.
When it works, it's great. Great, yeah, that's right. Well, is there anything that you want to add? Otherwise, we can let you go pretty early.
I think it's so important that we don't kind of leave this kind of stuff up to chance, that we're addressing it head on, and that we're not making it specific to sites, but rather to kind of bigger ideas of citizenship, because the sites are going to change and change. They're constantly evolving, and there are new things all the time. We're never going to get ahead of that. So it's more about instilling the big principles behind online safety and thinking about how we can contribute positively online as well. Like coming at digital citizenship from that side of the equation, kind of looking at both the difficulties but also the possibilities, and comparing it to everyday citizenship, where you have rights online, but you also have responsibilities to to be a contributing member of the digital world, right? And so helping students to do that, to kind of make a positive change online, I think is really powerful, and will set them up to be productive adults as well. So it's important to look at it from that perspective.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we didn't get more input from people, but I suspect I might have some questions to email you in the future from them.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm
Great.
happy to chat with people and happy to answer questions.
That's fabulous. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.